I've seen a lot of your content online, but the one that got me the most was absolutely the giant in Afghanistan, the Kandahar Giant story. And I don't know if you know, but I had Devin Larott on the podcast, the arm wrestler, and he told a story about how when he was in the Canadian military, he was deployed in Afghanistan, and one of the guys that he was working with over there had to have a conversation with a warlord, with a local warlord. And he said this guy was 8 feet tall. He said this guy was fucking huge, and not just tall, but wide. He said it was the biggest man he's ever seen in his life.
Well, I've heard a lot of things about giants in Afghanistan. And I find that, I talk about a lot of different topics. I talk about a lot of UFO stuff. And I say some things that I know could get me in trouble, but nothing makes me more nervous than talking about giants, specifically the Kandahar Giant and the giants in Kandahar in general.
Why?
Mainly because when I talk to people who know things, they're very, very nervous when we get to this topic. And some of them will just flat out will not talk about giants in general, but specifically giants in Afghanistan. And some of these guys are high-level guys that worked at the Pentagon, and they'll talk rather freely with me about UFOs. But as soon as we broach this topic, it's like they literally will warn me, be careful with this topic.
What?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the topic of giants is intermeshed with the occult. That's my personal theory, because nothing else makes sense. Who cares if there's 8-foot-tall guys, right? Big deal.
Right. Well, there's 8-foot-tall humans, right? We were just talking about that young kid that's a basketball player that's 7'9", right?
There's a few of them now I've seen.
Yeah. So there's actual giants that are in public.
Right.
That play for the NBA, and
right.
They're out there. You could meet them.
Mm-hmm. But when I say giants, I'm talking about 9 to 12 feet tall. That's 8 to 12 feet tall. I would classify an 8-foot-tall person as a giant as well, as long as they don't have gigantism.
Right.
That's a completely different thing.
Right.
Gigantism is a disability.
This Kandahar Giant story is very crazy because what's interesting about it is the people that I've talked to that have been in Afghanistan, that were deployed in Afghanistan, not just Devin, but other people, they don't dismiss it. They say, we've heard some weird shit about that place. And the thing that they always say is, you got to realize, Afghanistan is an old country. It's old and it's very remote. Most of it is very mountainous. It's controlled by warlords. And, look, there's these... What are those? Are they Greek or Roman? Those structures that are there that date the Greek. They look like Greek temples that date back to Alexander the Great, and archaeologists can't study them. They can't go there because it's too dangerous.
It's one of the most remote places on the planet, specifically because it's so dangerous. You can't just go strolling around Afghanistan. I mean, It probably would be easier to go to Antarctica than Afghanistan.
It's kind of hilarious.
So. The story of the Kandahar Giant.
Yeah, let's tell the story.
This story has grown into a mythology over the years. Years ago, I was working with a gentleman named Steve Quayle, and we started a production company called Gen 6 Productions. And we were making documentary films mainly about giants, mainly on the topic of giants.
Giants as referred to in the Bible, in ancient history, the Smithsonian giants.
That's right, biblical and historical accounts of giants. So I was traveling around the world investigating giants, and Steve is known for his investigations into giants. And he got a phone call from an elderly woman who told him, "You need to talk to my son. My son has a story he needs to tell you." And she had to convince her son to talk to Steve, and ultimately he did. And he was active duty. He was a C-130 pilot, active duty. He actually went on coast to coast with Steve. They went on coast to coast together, and he related his story, I believe, with George Norrie, him, Steve, and George. And then later on, we flew him into Bozeman, Montana to put him in our documentary film that we were making. And he did not he wanted to be filmed in silhouette. He did not want his face out there, even though he knew that they're going to be able to mark him just by his voice. So he flies into Bozeman. We meet with him. He shows us his credentials. He was active duty C-130. And then he told us the following story, among many other things that he told us. He said back in 2005, he was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq running missions as a C-130 cargo pilot. And oftentimes they would have him fly into Bagram Airfield. And these were routine missions. And so on one of these missions, he's flying into Bagram. But this time when he landed, he was met, as soon as he deplaned, he was met on the tarmac by some individuals that he describes as the babysitters. He calls them the babysitters. He thinks they were either Army intelligence or Air Force intelligence guys. They didn't tell him. But this was different because when he disembarked, they told him, no photos, no mention of this ever. This never happened. So he knew that whatever was about to happen was top secret. And he had flown classified missions before, usually retrieving Taliban guys, what he described as high-valued assets. But this was different because there were intelligence guys on the tarmac waiting for something. And it turns out what they were waiting for was the cargo that was being delivered on a forklift to the C-130. And the pilot says that the first thing that struck him as this cargo was moving toward him and his crew was the odor. He said it smelled like musk, BO, and death. And it was extremely pungent. And when the cargo arrived, it was on an air cargo pallet, which is 7x9. And he could see that there was a person on the pallet in the fetal position. And this individual was so large that his hands and his feet and part of his head were hanging off the pallet. And he and his loadmaster, and there were some Marines who accompanied the pallet, who accompanied this cargo, they were actually putting their feet up to this guy's feet, this dead giant's feet, and seeing how small their feet were compared to his. Now, the giant had red hair. He had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. His feet were wrapped in like a crude canvas foot wrapping. And he was solid as a rock. Again, most of his body was covered by a tarp, but the pilot and the guys around him were hitting him with their fists. And he came up to about their midsection, laying in the fetal position. And the pilot told me he was solid as a rock, this guy. And he asked the Marines, what happened? Where did this guy come from? And they told him that they had heard that there was a team that was out in Afghanistan that was looking for Taliban or something. And they came upon a cave because there was a nearby village, and the villagers were bringing food and other artifacts to the mouth of this cave. And so they thought that they're aiding and abetting the Taliban. So they went into the cave, and rather than encountering the Taliban, what they found was this enormous humanoid who killed them all. And then, according to these soldiers, they deployed another team to go look for that team. And when they found the cave, they found the traces of that other team. They were ready. They were prepared. And they were able to kill the giant. In fact, the soldiers told the pilot that the giant was eating on members of the team who had killed previously. But these new guys, they took him down, and then they had a transport helicopter come in and airlift him to Bagram.
Did you ever try to find records of who was there and casualties that were reported, deaths that were reported?
It's very difficult. The Pentagon actually released a statement some years ago, which is bizarre to me. You know, basically saying, in paraphrasing, the Kandahar Giant incident never happened. There was never a giant that was killed in Afghanistan.
The Pentagon?
So, yeah, it was a representative. It was like a spokesman from the Pentagon or something, or a release from the Pentagon.
Is this available online?
Yeah. They actually felt the need to debunk this.
That's hilarious.
Now,
that gets me sketchy.
Well, I believed the pilot because he was a very credible guy. He didn't want his name out there. He didn't want fame or notoriety. he was very nervous. He thought there's a good chance that they're going to recognize me by my voice. He was on Coast to Coast AM, and then he's on in our documentary. There's a good chance I'm going to get recognized, and there's going to be some reprisal. He was nervous. Now, they weighed the giant before they loaded him on the C-130, because they have to load everything that goes onto the C-130. The loadmaster weighed him. He weighed 1,100 pounds, and they estimated his height at 10 to 12 feet tall. And so they loaded him onto the C-130, and then they flew him to Qatar. And then they unloaded the cargo in Qatar. And our pilot told me he heard through the grapevine that the body ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He said, I don't know. That's just what I heard. So this is a firsthand account from the C-130 pilot who flew the body himself from Bagram Airfield to Qatar.
Why does all the weird shit go to Wright-Patterson?
That's a good question.
Because that's where the weird shit goes.
Wright-Patterson used to have the Blue Room. I don't know if they still have it, but they used to have a room there called the Blue Room where they had all of the alien artifacts that had been recovered and that they were studying. And it was completely off limits to anybody except for people who had access, the very few who had access. And but the Kandahar Giant, that story, a colleague of mine, L.A. Marsuli, he had another guy come to him, a different guy. We interviewed the pilot, Steve and I. L.A. had another guy come to him that was, I can't remember the details. He was a special forces guy. He had firsthand knowledge of the event as well. And we're not sure if it's the same one or a different one. If there was just one incident with the Giants or if there were multiple incidents. Now, years later, this would be just a couple of years ago because we published that film, I think, back in 2016. But just a couple of years ago, and I do have to be very careful here, I ran into a gentleman who was very high up, let's say, in the operations happening out there during the Iraq War and in Afghanistan. And this individual had he'd flown a lot of missions, and he was a commander. And I asked him, we were having a casual conversation, and he starts to walk away, and I said, hey, you were in flying missions in Afghanistan. I said, have you ever heard about the Kandahar Giant? And his wife was standing next to me, and he's sort of walking away. He turns around. The blood rushes out of his face, and he literally goes like this to me, points to his phone. And his wife whispers, he can't talk about that. So later on, I was able to, we agreed to meet it later on and in a very controlled environment. And he related a story to me that's the most wild story I've ever heard in my life. And I'm sorry, I can't relay it. I love this guy. I want to protect him. But it's not the giant of Kandahar. It's the giants of Kandahar. There's more than one. The military has known about it. And aside from him, I talked to other soldiers who've also had knowledge of the specific incident that I cited earlier, but then also in general the giants in Afghanistan. And I have a friend of mine who I met some years ago. Actually, I was with Lou Elizondo at Lou's Bar in Wyoming, and there was a friend of Lou's who's now a friend of mine there. And we were talking about the Kandahar Giant. I was just telling him the story I told you. And he just couldn't believe it. He thought, this is nuts. This is crazy. And I said, okay, do something for me. Next time you're talking to somebody in government or in the military who you think maybe might know something about this, bring it up. See what happens. So he called me one day and he said, Tim, you're not going to believe it. He said, I was talking to... I have to be very careful here too. He said, I was talking to a certain individual who works for a senator. He's a staffer. I believe he's a chief of staff for the senator, or at the very least an advisor. And he's got a military background, special forces. And he said, I was sitting there, we're really good friends. He said, we're having a casual conversation, as we always do. And just in the midst of this conversation, I said, hey, what do you know about the Kandahar Giant? And he said his face completely contorted. And he was no longer just, they were no longer just being happy and laughing. He became very stern. And he said, "What have you gotten yourself into? What are you looking into?" He said, "You need to be really careful." And he wouldn't tell him anything else. That's the kind of reaction that I get and others get whenever we try and get information on this story.
It's a very fun story. I don't know why it's so fun, but it's very fun. But the question is, what would be the reason why they would want to keep something like this a secret? I don't totally understand it.
I don't either.
I mean, if there really were a race of giants that survived, let's assume that what we're talking about is what's referenced in the Bible, right? Let's assume, or at least the Book of Enoch, right? The Nephilim, right? If we're talking about giants, like the thing about giants is like Native Americans have stories about red-headed giants. They talk about the same thing, about them having 6 fingers and 6 toes. They have these same myths. Like, how is it that people from the Middle East and people from North America have this same ancient story? And what is it in reference to? Like, why does that?
It's ubiquitous. The legends of giants are universal all over the
why
earth.
hide that? That's what I don't understand. Like, the stories about the Smithsonian are always fascinating.
Yeah.
Because the stories are, there have been archaeological digs, and they have discovered like enormous femurs that they thought were like woolly mammoths or something, and then they realized like, well, this is a giant human, and they find hair, and the hair is red, and that they take these bones and they tuck them away somewhere. I mean, this is always the myth. They tuck them away in the basement of the Smithsonian or somewhere else, and for whatever reason, the general public is not allowed to know about this. And I don't totally understand. What is it about giants that they would try to keep from us? Like, if they find a new species of dinosaur that's extinct, they'll let you know.
Right.
Fascinating.
Right.
Amazing. They find Homo floresiensis, or however you say it, the little hobbit people.
Yeah.
They'll let you know. Look, we found little hobbit people. Pretty cool. Giants, for whatever reason.
You know, it's a conundrum, and
If it's real.
it's
You think it's real?
giants in general.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%.
What makes you think it's real?
Okay, so let me tell you why I think that this thing's being covered up, and then I'll tell you why I think it's real, and we'll go to Sardinia for that. So I, like you, have been wondering for a long time, like, what is the big deal? And initially, people in my field, especially people who are coming from a biblical perspective, the common answer is, well, the existence of giants would affirm the biblical narrative, right? And so the secular atheist types don't want the biblical narrative affirmed. That can't be right, because the existence of giants doesn't just affirm the biblical narrative. It affirms the myths and legends of every ancient culture across the globe,
Right.
including the Bible. So it's not something that's specific, exclusive to the text of Scripture. So it would just affirm all these legends in general. So the only thing that makes sense to me at this point, and the other line of thinking, by the way, would be that it would somehow conflict with the theory of evolution by natural selection, which I don't really buy into that either, because they would just say that this branch of humanoids, they descended from Gigantopithecus or something like that. I don't think it would be that difficult of a problem for the theory of evolution by natural selection either. I'm not myself an evolutionist, but I don't see them having that difficult of a problem here. So the only thing left on the table for me is that there's something very sinister going on in regard to the remains of giants. And if you study the mythology of giants all over the world, especially in the ancient Near East, you will discover that there was, in fact, a cult of giants, that there were cultures that venerated giants, and that there was a very particular belief about giants. And this goes back into the book of Enoch. And the idea is that this race of beings who are not entirely human, they're hybrids, that when they die, you can still make contact with their spirits, with their souls. They can be summoned. In fact, these are the demons in the New Testament of the Bible, these are the demons that possess people. This is the origin of demons, by the way, in Hebrew cosmology. So there's this pervasive idea again, especially in the ancient Near East, that dead giants can be communicated with and can possess living human beings, their spirits. And so you have a cult of giants in the ancient Near East, especially among the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, they had actually there's various customs and rites related to giants, but one of the specific ones that we know about is called Kispum, the rite of Kispum. And there's a fantastic book written by my friends Derek and Sharon Gilbert called Veneration, where they detail the rite of Kispum and this idea of making contact with the spirits of dead giants and the veneration of giants. And the rite of Kispum was practiced, broadly speaking, in the ancient Near East, but specifically among the Amorites and other Canaanite clans as well. And what they would do is they would hold a feast, and then they would invite the dead to come and join them at the feast. So this was a necromantic rite. And they would evoke the dead, and they believed that the dead would come and eat with them. Now, the kings, and specifically the Amorite kings, they would invoke the spirits of the mighty ones, the great ones, the giants of old, the Rephaim. The biblical account names various different clans of giants that inhabited the Levant during and after the conquest by Joshua and the Hebrews. And you had the Anakim, who descended from the Nephilim. You had the Rephaim, the Zamzumim, the Amim. These are various clans of giants that are specifically named in the Bible. Of course, we get Goliath of Gath. Gath is a Philistine city. After Joshua entered the Promised Land, they drove out and eradicated a lot of these giant clans. But some of them remained. Some of the individuals remained, and they went to the Philistine cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And so you have Goliath of Gath, who David encounters later in the biblical text. So it's these heroes of old, these descendants of the Nephilim, that the Amorites and the ancient Near Easterners are attempting to make contact with, because they have knowledge, and these are possessing spirits. And so the rite of Kispum, the kings would summon the Rephaim by name. And you can find this in the Ugaritic texts. Ugarit was an Amorite city-state located on the shore of the Mediterranean in what is today northern Syria. And they have uncovered documents where the Amorite kings are summoning, specifically by name, summoning dead giants, the Rephaim. And the idea is to summon them and then to become empowered by their spirits, their possessing spirits. Again, this goes back to the tradition of Enoch, that the giants, when they die, their spirits are in sort of a state of suspended animation, and they can be revived. They can be resurrected, as it were, and can be made to inhabit the bodies of human beings. So there's this ancient cult that existed in the ancient Near East and in other parts of the world. And it's associated with the cult of Baal. So you have Baal, the giants were thought of as the warriors of Baal. So today we know that the cult of Baal persists. I mean, the Epstein files. We know that the cult of Baal is still being practiced.
When you say the Epstein files, what do you mean? What is the
There's
cult?
references to Baal, and there's this recurrent theme of Baal worship. And Baal, Jesus refers to Baal as Satan in the New Testament. So it's basically Satanism. It's a satanic cult.
And how is it referenced in the Epstein files?
There's some references to Baal. I can't remember the exact references, but there's apparently a cult of Baal, and the elites are obsessed with some of the elites. I don't know who or how many of them, but it's becoming increasingly apparent that there's an infatuation with these ancient Near Eastern cults, specifically the Canaanitish cults. And so the reason why I'm going through all of this is because I think it's still alive and well today in society, and I believe that they're using the bones, the remains of giants in these practices. I think it's extremely dark. I think this is part of the reason why there may be a cover-up around it. Nothing else makes sense to me.
In terms of the cover-up?
In terms of the cover-up, what we
Well,
were
the
talking about
cover-up,
earlier.
it makes sense to me that you have incredibly powerful, wealthy people that don't want to be exposed as being perverts and
Yeah.
whatever the fuck they were up to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all the weird shit with beef jerky and pizza. You know, there's these very strange references that seem to not be talking about beef jerky, and not it's some kind of a code.
Yeah.
And there's also the fact that he brought an enormous amount of sulfuric acid, like right after he was indicted,
Right.
to the island. Like, I forget how many gallons of it, but barrels of sulfuric acid,
Right.
which is what you would use to dissolve bodies. So it's like, it seems like there's a lot of reasons for a cover-up. If this guy was running some sort of blackmail operation and had information on powerful people, that would make sense that's why they would cover it up.
Well, that's the cover-up of the pedophilia.
Or
But-
even if it's not pedophilia, even just adultery
Right,
or drug use or whatever.
The ball thing apparently comes up on a bank file, and it may have been misinterpreted. It does say BAAL.name. But people who are digging into this say that it might have just been a misinterpretation. That's the only mention of it.
Misinterpretation?
Yeah, I mean, it's another page here shows it. Here's like the document. Mm-hmm. It might have just, I don't, it doesn't even say it there that I can see it.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
not
right
sure
here.
exactly
Here's where it says it, you know.
exactly where Baal is referenced specifically.
Yeah, right there.
There for
That's
one place for
It's a
sure.
bank document. I don't know if that has anything to do with the occult specifically.
But just imagine if it's the name of Satan and this is the name of your bank account.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite odd. Yeah.
That's at least creepy.
Yeah, for sure.
At least creepy.
Yeah, so you have this scenario in which, let's just say for the sake of argument that it's true.
Okay.
Okay, that the legends are true, the giants are real, that you can make contact with their spirits
Through their bones?
maybe through their remains, that, or at least people believe this, and so
Is there some sort of a method that they use?
Yeah, well, okay, so this will get us into Sardinia. So whenever anyone asks me, what's the best evidence you've ever seen for the existence of giants? Now, you've already cited some historical context around this. The legend of giants is everywhere. It's in every continent. And you have giants, aside from the biblical account, obviously all over the Mesopotamia, the cult of giants. In the United States, during the era of the Smithsonian Gate, the Smithsonian Institution's apparent cover-up of giants, especially the ones that were being discovered in the mounds here in the United States. But it's pervasive. In Peru, there's legends of giants. And the natives, the indigenous peoples, absolutely believe there was a primordial race of giants. The same thing in Central America. They believe there was a primordial race of giants that was destroyed in a cataclysm, specifically a flood. That's what the Inca believed. That Viracocha, the guy Viracocha, created first a race of giants, but they were stupid and evil, and so he destroyed them in a flood. Same story down in up in Mexico and among the Aztec, and the Native Americans, the six-fingered red-haired giants, and so forth. So there's a lot of historical context, and of course it's anecdotal, but how much anecdotal evidence just at one point does anecdotal evidence just become evidence when it's so pervasive all over the world?
Right.
So, as I was traveling around the world studying giants and researching this topic and investigating different stories and legends, I went to Malta, which is very interesting. Obviously, lots of legends of giants in Malta associated with the megaliths, and then I kind of hit ground zero for giants, which is the island of Sardinia, and the island of Sardinia is located west of Rome. It's part of Italy. It's in the Western Mediterranean, below Corsica. And many people don't realize this about Sardinia, but Sardinia has the most megaliths anywhere on Earth. It has the highest concentration of megaliths anywhere that I've been, as far as I'm aware of. There are these massive megalithic towers called nuraghi that were constructed allegedly by or conventionally by the the Neuragic civilization, Bronze Age civilization. And there are today still at least 7,000 of these things standing. You can go to Sardinia and see 7,000 Nuragi towers. There were at one time 10 to 30,000 of these megalithic towers. And some of these towers stood over 100 feet tall.
Shammy, can we see some pictures of these?
I'm trying to figure out what I just.
Yeah, how would he look?
Nuragi,
I'm just,
Sardinia, Nuragi.
I was
Nuragi
looking, I
spelled.
got three different
they're
things,
there.
so I guess this is it.